Let's talk about artist block. I was in Paris about 2 months ago. It was the height of spring, everything was beautiful, and I had an entire week of vacation ahead of me. So naturally, I wanted to do a lot of drawing and a lot of painting. But because I was in a different country and I was there for a limited time, and because my social media pages have blown up recently, I felt a tremendous sense of pressure to perform. In some ways, I think of my work as an artist in a similar way as an athlete thinks about training and competition. To the extent that I can, I want to deliver to you the transcendent beauty that you would find in philosophy textbooks or when you read ancient literature. I want to deliver that to you in exactly the same way that Michael Jordan dunks over his opponents. And I know that's a bit out there, but the reason why I say that is because there's natural resistance to creative work. And at least one way that I overcome that is by trying to cultivate the mind of a champion. When it comes to drawing on location, one of the easiest ways that I overcome this sense of fear and resistance is through the sketch walk. If you've seen my content before, you're probably familiar with this and you've seen me do it 100 times. And this time we're doing it in Montmartre, which is a beautiful neighborhood north of Paris. Even though it's considered outside of the main city center, it's still swarming with tourists because it is that pleasant. It's also where Amélie was filmed, so you may recognize some of these views. Essentially, the purpose of this exercise is to take in lots of views rather than make one masterpiece. Many artists will say, think like a photographer. Walk around, look at things, and make mental note of the compositions that grab your attention. In a place like this, there could be lots of good choices, but among them, there are probably still a few outliers. As you come across them, it's helpful to set a couple of parameters to help get pen to paper. For example, I use these small frames, and I limit myself to about 5 minutes. Working this way, I can usually fill a page in about an hour. Now, in terms of drawing and making art in the same way as Michael Jordan, this is a little less like a playoff game and more like preseason practice. There's a lot less pressure, but you're still going through many of the same motions. It's a methodical but low stakes way of warming up the hand and entering a more observant and studious mind. It's a way of breaking that artist block, one small hammer blow at a time, and gathering a sense of confidence as we work into longer drawing sessions. The last step might be the most important, and that is to keep working on them. One piece of advice that I often give to artists is that an extra 10 minutes on a work of art can make a really big difference. That time will give you just an extra little bit where you can clean up some of those stray marks, redraw certain parts, and add color and so on. And it's a really good skill to develop looking at a work of art, identifying what's wrong with it, and then taking the steps needed to correct it. From the outside, traveling always looks glamorous, but there were a lot of ups and downs during this trip. If you watched my last video, you know that just getting here was a marathon effort, and that was just the beginning. But if there's one thing that I'm proud of, it's that the entire time I kept the artist hammer out. I mean, not this one. I obviously wasn't allowed to bring this on my flight, but the point is that people ask me about artist block as if it were some sort of actual diagnosis that I could help them with. And if people are going to treat it that seriously, then I just want to introduce the hammer as something equally serious. There is a trend on TikTok right now that I absolutely love. It's basically about people realizing that when they're self-critical, when they put themselves down, that they're really telling the childhood version of themselves that they can't. They're putting down that person. And I thought that that's absolutely right. Because when I look at photos of myself when I was a kid, I know that I wanted to be the next Michael Jordan. this guy right here, and maybe perhaps every other kid growing up in the 90s, he wanted to be the next Michael Jordan. And that's why I think that it's important that as the adult in the room, you need to get the hammer out, and you need to break through that, and you need to tell someone, you need to tell your younger self that you can. I made drawings all around Paris, and I'll get to them in my next videos, but let's go back to Sakurakura. In my last video, I shared this drawing, which I thought was fine, but I originally envisioned something else, something from the bottom of the hill looking up. There's a carousel there. I tried drawing this composition like 7 times, and I couldn't get it quite right, and time was running out. The sketch walk that I was showing you earlier was on my second day of the trip, and this was the last day of the trip. And I felt that I had this unfinished business. This was like the playoff game, where there was time ticking on the clock, and I needed to be clutch.
The Bulls have 3 seconds to try a shot and try to win the game.
There are times in life when you can feel yourself standing on top of a precipice of meaning, some sort of culmination, and in that moment I made the best drawing I had ever done before. I felt confident of that. It was the best so far. And I say that because just after that, I went back to the neighborhood streets in Montmartre, and I went to one of the locations that identified as the best of the best. And I drew there for a few hours. And there, I made an even better one. And that was perhaps one of the better days in my entire life. And I felt that between these 2 sketches, I had touched a quality of work that I hadn't touched before. So, I don't know if that's the best explanation of how to get through artist block, but I also know that you can break through. So, break through.